First, there was a disparity of numbers here. There were 2 pranksters and 1 victim of the prank. We can see that here. The 2 pranksters on the right and the delivery man alone on the left. And by the way, there's not a lot of other people here we can see, right? As we watch this video, this food court's largely empty. So there's not a lot of help coming. Even if someone were silly enough to come to the defense of another person, that really wouldn't be a reasonable expectation here. So we have a disparity of numbers. What's that mean? Well, it goes to the element of proportionality, right? The element of proportionality says you can't use deadly defensive force unless you're facing a deadly force threat. So clearly, if the pranksters had displayed a weapon or something that appeared like a weapon, that would have satisfied this element of proportionality for the defense. All they display is what appears to be a cell phone held up to the face of the delivery guy. So if they're not displaying a weapon, how could you perceive a deadly force threat? Well, disparity of numbers answers that question. One defender cannot reasonably defend himself against 2 attackers without resort to a weapon. It's just not possible. This isn't the movies where you have Bruce Lee fighting off 30 attackers as they come at him one at a time. If there's 2, it's hard enough to win a fight against 1 person. If there's 2 people, you're done. You're not going to win that fight unless you resort to a weapon. And the question, of course, is, are you being subject to unlawful deadly force by the aggressors? But deadly force includes not just force that can kill you. The definition of deadly force is force that can readily kill you or cause serious bodily injury. Loss of a bodily function, broken bone, loss of consciousness, some sustained injury that would take time to heal from. Can 2 aggressors do that to a single defender? Cause serious bodily injury? Readily cause serious bodily injury. It's not like a 1 in a million chance. Yeah, for sure. So the disparity of numbers here is consistent with these 2 pranksters presenting as a reasonably perceived deadly force threat, meaning a threat readily capable of causing at least serious bodily injury. A second factor here is disparity of size. At least one of the pranksters, and I would suggest both of them, appear to be taller than the defender. The one in the black hoodie and the white hat here, Cook, the person who would be shot, is substantially taller, much taller than the defender, likely much heavier than the defender. It appears to me here, but certainly larger, at least in stature. Folks, a mere 8-pound weight difference puts competitors in different classes of competition in the combat sports, in wrestling, in boxing, in MMA, in BJJ competition. 8 pounds is all it takes for those entities, those combat sport entities, to say, no, we're not going to let you fight each other because it would be unfair. It's inherently unfair. So you don't need much of a difference in size to have a big difference in physical capability in terms of the aggressor versus the defender. So disparity of size again goes to this question of proportionality, particularly in the context of the ability of these aggressors, these pranksters, to be reasonably capable of inflicting serious bodily injury here. So that's 2 factors, 2 bits of evidence that we can see just from this video consistent with lawful self-defense, particularly on the element of proportionality. A third factor, it's the pranksters here who are unambiguously the aggressors, right? So the food delivery guy's not approaching them, they're approaching him. And this goes to the element of innocence. Innocence meaning that you were not the unlawful aggressor in the fight. So clearly, from the evidence here, this food delivery guy is not the person initiating this confrontation. It's the pranksters. So here's a third factual element we can see just from the video that's consistent with lawful self-defense on the element of innocence. The fourth factor, the delivery guy repeatedly communicates to the pranksters to stay back from him. That indicates that has a fear of harm from them. That goes, again, it goes to innocence. that he's not the aggressor. He's asking them to stay away. Aggressors don't do that, right? Aggressors need to close proximity. It goes to the element of reasonableness. Did he have a subjective, genuine good faith fear of harm? Well, these statements, stay back, you don't say that to someone that you feel is friendly towards you. You say that when you perceive a threat. So it goes to his subjective state of mind. Fifth, the pranksters engaged in unambiguously threatening conduct. Now, they didn't present a weapon, but they continued to close on this delivery guy as he backed up, as he asked them to keep out of his personal space. And they're presenting that cell phone to his face in an aggressive manner. And while they don't display a weapon, folks, motions towards a victim's head and neck, as the pranksters are doing here, that's the highest degree of non-weapon threat you can have. That's the most threatening conduct you can engage in, other than display of a weapon. It's why if you touch someone's face, you better be prepared for fists coming back. Because our face is the least defensible part of our body inherently, right? Our eyes are there, everything sensitive is there, our neck. And if you gain control of someone's head, you control their whole body. And we all know this instinctively. We all flinch back if someone we don't know reaches for our face. It's threatening conduct, which again goes to the defenders here, subjective state of mind. It's consistent with a subjective belief that he's facing a threat here, these constant gestures with a physical object. Now, we don't normally think of a cell phone as a weapon, but if it's being punched into your face, it becomes a weapon. The fist is a weapon. Can these two people inflict serious bodily injury with just their fists without the need of a weapon on this defender? Sure, they can. So it's this unambiguously threatening conduct to the delivery guy's face. They're not standing 6 feet away and keeping away from his face and head and neck, right? They're maintaining their presence in his personal space, threatening his head, face, and neck. And they could obviously, they're well within the tooler distance, so they could be on his face, head, and neck in an instant. All consistent with lawful self-defense. Consistent also, by the way, with an objective perception of threat, which is the second half of reasonableness, the element of reasonableness. You need that subjective belief. That belief also has to be objectively reasonable, meaning it needs to not be speculative or imaginative. You know, he's not saying, well, for all I know, they could have had a weapon. The defender here is not saying, he's not speculating a threat. Their hands are in his face with that cell phone. We can all see that on the video. So there's objective evidence from which he's making a reasonable inference of threat here. And finally, this delivery guy, he doesn't know he's merely being subject to a prank by these two aggressive men. He doesn't know they're just pranksters. Now, it turns out they're just pranksters. The delivery guy will say, hey, I believe they were a threat, that they were criminal aggressors. That's why I shot one of them. I believe they were criminal aggressors. Now, that belief was apparently mistaken. Apparently, they weren't criminal aggressors. Apparently, they were just pranksters, just a-holes. So the delivery guy had a mistaken impression, right? But does not matter for self-defense. Are you required to make perfect decisions in self-defense? You're not, folks. You're not. You're only required to make reasonable decisions, meaning decisions based on actual facts, non-speculative, non-irrational. Reasonable decisions. Mistakes are permissible in lawful self-defense so long as they are reasonable mistakes. There's no way this delivery guy could have known these were two pranksters, especially given their quite aggressive conduct here. And we're allowed to make our decisions in lawful self-defense based on reasonable inferences we're making from actual evidence we're observing based on what we know in the moment, not what we may learn later, based on the totality of circumstances in the moment. This delivery guy is not at a comedy festival, right? He's in a food court. No one would be comfortable being approached by these two guys in this manner. So again, we can only judge him by the facts that could have been known to him, the evidence he's observing in the moment. Now, these 6 elements I just described, well, let me call them 6 factors so they're not confused with the elements of self-defense. Oh, by the way, the element of avoidance, I don't think I touched upon. So this is Virginia. Virginia says you do not have a legal duty to retreat unless you contributed to the affray. It's actually a pretty common standard. So in most states, if you did contribute to the affray, if you were the aggressor or a mutual combatant, you do acquire a legal duty to retreat, even in most of the stand your ground states, really all the stand your ground states. And the way that works is if you were an aggressor or a mutual combatant, well, a mutual combatant just means both parties are mutual aggressors. So they both lose the element of innocence. They both lose self-defense, but they can regain self-defense. They can regain that element of innocence that they lost by withdrawing from the conflict and communicating their withdrawal. I don't want to fight anymore, and backing up from the fight. You're still on the hook for whatever you did before that moment in terms of use of force. But from that moment on, you've regained the element of innocence. Now for the fight to continue, what has to happen? If you're withdrawing, you're physically removing yourself, and you've communicated that to the other party. For the fight to continue now, they have to pursue you, right? Because you're moving away. And if they pursue you, they become a sole aggressor in a new fight, a second fight. And in that new fight, because they are now the sole aggressor, you've regained innocence, you have regained self-defense for purposes of defending yourself in that second fight. So that's basically how Virginia works. But if you were not an initial aggressor or a mutual combatant, if you did not contribute to the affray, you're purely an innocent victim, a non-aggressor in the confrontation, you have no legal duty to retreat under Virginia law. Nevertheless, this delivery guy is retreating, right? He's backing away from these 2 pranksters, these 2 aggressive men. So even if he were in a viciously aggressive duty to retreat state, like Massachusetts, my former home state, Massachusetts, you have a legal duty to retreat before you can use even non-deadly force in self-defense. He would have satisfied that duty because he's attempting to retreat from them. So avoidance would be satisfied, not really a viable attack by the prosecutor. And imminence. The element of imminence requires that the threat you're defending yourself against is either actually occurring in the moment or it's immediately about to occur. It's a little ambiguous here. It depends on how you characterize the nature of the threat here. What certainly is not happening is this is not some kind of threat that's over and the delivery guy came back and shot them. And it's not a speculative future threat that may never happen, right? The pranksters are not saying, we're going to go home, get a gun, come back here and shoot you. So there's something going on in the moment, right? Now, it could be just the threatening gestures to the face. That's happening in the moment, right? It could be a fear of an imminent, immediately about to occur, more aggressive physical hands-on attack by these 2 guys. You don't have to wait until you're attacked before you can defend yourself. You can defend yourself against the imminent threat, the threat that's apparently immediately about to occur. So this delivery guy doesn't have to wait till he's punched or grabbed or thrown to the ground before he can defend himself. He can defend himself from what is about to happen as he reasonably perceives it. So now I think we've touched upon all the elements: innocence, imminence, proportionality, avoidance, and reasonableness. The prosecutor has to disprove one of those beyond a reasonable doubt. And clearly, given the acquittal on the malicious wounding charge here, the only legal defense was self-defense. The jury concluded that the prosecution had not done that. And because the prosecution had not disproven, in the view of the jury, any one of the elements of self-defense beyond a reasonable doubt, they were obliged to acquit on this, the most serious charge here, the malicious wounding charge. Now, does that mean the jury believes this was definitely lawful? No. The jury might think, you know what, the 70% chance this looks like a bad shoot to me. And that's still an acquittal, folks, because the legal question is not, was this more likely than not lawful self-defense? Has the state disproven one of these elements by a preponderance of the evidence? That's not the legal question in criminal court. The legal question is, has the state disproven any one of the elements beyond any reasonable doubt? Let's pretend that beyond a reasonable doubt, the highest threshold we have in the law, because certainty is never required. Let's pretend that beyond a reasonable doubt means proof by 95%. That 5% remaining That's the reasonable doubt. Well, that means the defense effectively has to be able to argue to the jury that, listen, we don't have to prove that these elements exist. We only have to convince you, the jury, that there's at least a reasonable doubt that these elements exist. And if there's at least a reasonable doubt, then they haven't been disproven beyond a reasonable doubt. And you're obliged to acquit. Even if you think it's almost certain that this was not a lawful shooting, unless that certainty is beyond a reasonable doubt, you are obliged to acquit. And that's exactly what the jury did. Now, I wish I'd heard the closing argument of this trial. That would have been great. I'd like to know exactly what argument the defense counsel made here. But clearly they did something right, because they secured the acquittal for their client on this most serious of the charges.